We're live here with another show. I think we might be calling this show the Zardoz Conjunction, but we'll get to that later. Today, our special guest is Dr. Timothy Doran. He's going to talk to us about Homer, among other things. And then I'll have my regular co-hosts, Chris Porrow, Amber Greenlee, and hopefully Dale Sipperley. Unfortunately, okay, I'm trying to now play the theme tune, but I can't access it because I'm on a laptop. All right, here we are. All right, so here's the theme tune.
Yeah. I'm just going up this water spout, y'all. Yep.
Wrong theme tune.
One day I was wandering through the aisles of my art store. I bought myself a Pictomicron and some Bristol board. I made a fancy comic, and now I am all set to be the greatest web cartoonist on the fucking internet. I'll have a forum and a blog and links from DVD. I'll get reviewed by Websnark, Green and William G. The world can be a roaster. I think it's a safe bet when you're the greatest web cartoonist on the fucking internet. When you're the greatest web cartoonist on the fucking internet.
All right, that's the old theme tune.
Dale's here.
We got a number of theme tunes. That's the web cartoonist song by Owen Dunn, which I love. This show's a little more broad than just web comics. We talk about all sorts of different things, and I think maybe I think I've got a new name for the show, which is the Zardoz Conjunction. I don't know. How does that sound?
Put it in the
I'm
bag.
all for it.
Yeah.
The
We need a little song
conjunction.
like the Rainbow Connection.
The Zardoz connection.
Add it to the
The
list.
Zardoz Conjunction.
There's
Because we had a Zardoz Conjunction the other day. Like we had a sort of guest D&D dungeon master here, and he projected up like a character who looked like Sean Connery. And so of course, like when we had the Sean Connery cutout, the Zardoz DVD was sitting there, and Chris had a little Zardoz pin which had arrived to him via way of Dale. Thank you, Dale. So there was a little Zardoz Conjunction going on, and then it turned out that this Sean Connery character, he had two not twin brothers, but I don't know, there were two others who were sort of identical to him, who were also Sean Connerys. You know, so I'm like, okay, that fits right in with Dale's theory about, you know, Sean Connery being this sort of transcendental being that connects us all together through. But really, it's the character Zed through Sean Connery. Sean Connery is just a sort of cipher for Zed in the movie Zardoz.
I also liked your experiments with the scribble diffusion and the Zardoz head. That was interesting.
Oh yes, I had some fun with scribble diffusion. Once I realised, sort of, I spent a bit of time. I have a
Oh yeah, those are
Apple
cool.
iPad and a pen.
I didn't know about that
So-
AI.
Yeah, I was able to, draw into it a little more carefully. It was a little annoying.
Sean Connery became the vessel for Zardoz after Zed figured out how to escape the film. And it's an interesting parallel that the Tabernacle used Arthur Frayne and Friend to breed a being that looked exactly like Sean Connery. And the creators of our reality bred Sean Connery so that this transfer could occur.
Are you ever going to write a thesis about your theory?
I've written Chuck a number of times about this. After I'm dead, I'll let historians piece it together.
Yeah, it's good. And I think a lot of it's come across on the show. The AIs of the future will be able to reassemble this strange faith. You should apply for a status though. Like once we get the show going. Anyway, on with our guests. We normally save that sort of stuff till we run out of things to talk about. So today we've got Dr. Tim Doran with us. He's a professor of ancient history. He was one of my very first live stream guests back when I was doing the Itsy Bitsy Spider Show. That's why Itsy Bitsy just almost resurfaced for a moment there with the theme tune. But yes, so that's over a year ago since we did that, and then you came back again at the end of the Kickstarter campaign, and then we've been going all year, and we had a sort of year of like, well, we talked about Zardoz a lot and had a few guests, and then lately we've had some more guests on, and just talking about different topics of the day, really. And well, I billed you for Homer. Because you have some theories about Homer you want to talk about. And yes, and I was saying it was a family show, but it's not really, because and that current theme tune, I realise, is not at all a family show theme tune. So I'm probably going to retire that one again in a minute.
Show.
Are we going to talk about Homer and his wine dark sea and how the idea and concept of blue didn't show up for thousands of years?
Yes, that's a great one. That's a great one. I love that one.
Yeah.
So there's more of the chromatic vagueness in the vocabulary is what we're talking about here, right?
Yeah.
Yes, and then that people, the theory is that people couldn't see blue in the past. Like, we didn't have a word for it, so we couldn't see it. And this
not
actually,
that they couldn't see it; it's that they couldn't perceive it. And there's a difference between being able to see and being able to perceive something. They've done experiments with African tribes where they have laid out things like different colors, purple, blue, and stuff like that, and to them, like purple and blue and some shades of like brown and stuff were all the same color, but you laid out green and they could tell distinctions between all the greens, because to them the color green is more important to their daily life than like blue or purple.
oh,
Same is true.
hang on. All right, Tina's saying we're not live. Did we check the streams? Oh my goodness.
Yeah, I don't see you on there yet.
Oh
Sean.
no! All right, have we
no,
done it again
are we
when we
gonna have
didn't?
to start?
No, it says we're live. Wait.
Do we have a week stream? This show?
It's not showing up on my
Oh,
channel either.
unable to connect on Facebook for some reason.
Okay, let's swear a lot while we can.
Tim, welcome to the technical support portion of the program.
Yes.
Yeah.
Oh no! Well, it seems to be going out to other places, but it seems to be a technical problem with. I can try turning it off and on again.
This is not my first rodeo.
We're
This happened
we're
last time
going
too,
live
Tim?
to Twitch, so we're actually
Yeah,
there.
and it seems like it's going out okay to YouTube.
Tim, have you
YouTube.
seen
Okay.
Zardoz?
Pardon me?
Have you seen the movie Zardoz?
Yeah, I saw it. The last time I saw it was in the, around 2003, I think. So about 20 years ago.
Time to see it again.
I know. I loved it.
Tim, what did you?
I will give it another try, Dale.
What
I
was your
will.
take?
I will try.
What was your take on that movie, Tim? Because I have a take on it. I've watched it once. Dale lent me a copy of it, and I watched it just this one time. And I had a take on it. Do you have a take on it?
Well,
Like,
actually, the last time I was on this show, Dale had very interesting theories about sort of transcendent theories and mentioned them to me. And I will confess that I had seen it more of as a sci-fi than as a kind of Matrix type of thing. But I'm willing to look at it again and think of it in those terms too.
Cool.
Yeah,
Thank
can
you.
we? Yeah, yes.
So Tim, what's your discipline in history?
Right. So I got my PhD from UC Berkeley, and my PhD fields were ancient Greek history, Roman history, and then I did my third minor field in Phoenician history. If I could have redone it, I would have done my third field in ancient Egypt, and that's probably one of the biggest mistakes of my life, because we had plenty of personnel that could have taught me Egyptology, and I didn't take advantage of that. So I would say
Polynesian, that's still pretty cool,
No,
like-
Phoenician, not Polynesian.
Oh, Phoenician. I'm sorry.
Phoenician.
We're still in
Yeah.
the ancient Mediterranean. No, Polynesian would be amazing too, but this is a Mediterranean based program. And so my dissertation was about the causes and the effects of the population decline in Sparta between about when the decline started in the 460s BC, and then I carried it down to about 192 BC when the Romans took over that section of Greece.
What did you use for your sources?
There's plenty of literary sources. Aristotle noticed the population decline and wrote about it. Xenophon talks about it. He talks about some of the effects of it, and then I think the decline is the cause of a bunch of the military problems that Sparta had, and it seems to be.
Well, Sparta was very I don't want to say fascist, but they were very like, this is the way that Spartans are. And if anything was outside of that, it was not Spartan.
Well, starting at least at the latest around 500 BC, they stopped producing artwork or slowed it way the hell down. And their citizens were expected to be military men and not practice other crafts. It's a very austere society, a very, very militaristic society. And there probably was not a lot of scope for non-military musings and things like that. So it is often regarded as very different from Athens. But the problem that they underwent is that through some combination of economic problems and possibly other sort of problems with demography, they did not recover from a terrible earthquake that happened in the 460s. They never recovered from it. The population never recovered, and it just sort of went into free fall. They lost people in the wars that followed, and they didn't regenerate their citizen population. So the question would be, is it because they did not want to enfranchise non-citizens? In that case, it's kind of a almost racial superiority attitude. That's probably some of it. But also there seems to have been a concentration of wealth. And if you are not able to give a certain amount of contributions to your mess hall, your dining club every month, then you dropped out of the Spartiate citizen body.
Now I have a question. So this decline in their population, my sparse understanding of that part of history, like you're definitely an expert of it. So when they were fighting the Persians, right? You had Sparta and you had Athens and you had all these Greek city-states fighting together.
Right.
And then at some point, the Spartans joined up with the Persians against the other city-states. Was this decline in population before or after that?
Right. So that's more or less right. So basically, the Persian Wars starting in the 480s, essentially BC. This was before the earthquake occurred that harmed Sparta's population. And at that point, the Greek city-states did have a hard time joining together against the Persian threat. It's like herding cats, and some of them actually became pro-Persian. Spartans and the Athenians sort of had an alliance and became very anti-Persian, and that's all narrated by Herodotus, who lived just a generation or two after these events, not too far off. Then what happens is, after the Persians get kicked out of the Aegean Sea, the Athenians sort of took over the league of Greek city-states that had been contributing money for a fleet to keep the Persians out. Athenians have this humongous fleet, and they're saying to the other Greek city-states, okay, well, we still need contributions in case the Persians come back. And that was perfectly fair, but then they turned that into essentially a protection racket. Give us contributions or else, and their behavior toward the Greek city-states that didn't want to contribute became extremely brutal and cruel. Other Greek city-states then went to Sparta and said, look, we need help. The Athenians have become absolutely bullies, and so will you help us? You are so legendary and good at war. Spartans were a lot of things, but they didn't really like overseas wars, and they were suffering from a population crisis, but they agreed. And so you have two power blocks, Athenians and their allies versus the Spartans and their allies. Eventually, the Spartans start to run out of resources. This is called the Peloponnesian War, starts in 431 BC, ends in 404/403 BC. Eventually, the Spartans kind of run out of resources, and then one of the Spartans, Lysander, one of the most interesting characters, he actually goes over to Persia and gets help from a Persian prince and starts to get Persian money. This enables the Spartans to fund more fleets, pay their rowers, and eventually they are able to defeat the Athenian Empire. But the Athenians were asking for it. They were acting very, very poorly. Anyone will say that. And then the Spartans start to develop their own kind of small, very short-lived overseas empire. But that is the leadership of that is sort of in disagreement about what the best thing to do is.
I think that's awesome. Sorry, I love history. I've always loved history.
Me too.
Tim, how does an earthquake affect them so badly? Is it
Right.
the collapse of houses? Or?
You would
Look
think
at
that
what happened in Turkey.
Yeah, you would think that wouldn't. Yeah. The Turkish example is a great one. Apparently, this earthquake's epicenter was in Sparta itself, and there are references to a falling gymnasium and that sort of thing, and many houses being destroyed. And what Plutarch writes, and that's, keep in mind that is a long time later, but he is using earlier sources. What he writes is that a huge percentage of houses in the town of Sparta itself were destroyed by this earthquake. So we're talking about something ridiculously devastating, killing tons and tons and tons and tons of people. The adult male population of full Spartan citizens, known as the Spartiates, had been about 8,000 in 480 BC, according to Herodotus. It seems to have dropped to maybe 3,000 the next time we get some kind of count, which is in the 450s BC. Earthquake probably occurred in 465 or so BC, certainly in the 460s.
That's what I was going to ask you. Like, where did the numbers come from? Was there like, I think the Romans had like a census thing going on.
Yeah,
but
the Greeks didn't have a census, but what we will get is, I mean, all numbers are suspect in ancient history, but what we do have is numbers of troops that were present at particular battles. There are references in Aristotle, who was a goddamn well placed in terms of information. He had the essentially graduate students fanned out to the other Greek city states taking notes. He relied on pretty good records, and he says that the Spartiates had about 10,000 adult male citizens in some unspecified time before 500 BC. And then down in his own time, he's writing this. This is a treatise that he's writing in the 330s or so. He says there are only, I think, 1,000 at this point. So the citizen body number had contracted. And again, part of this is due to economic reasons, wealth polarization causing the sort of the less wealthy Spartiates to be kicked out of the Spartiate class. Like you could even call it a caste rather than a class. But alongside that, there are other probable reasons. And one of the reasons that I think is probably needs looking at is that this, unlike other elite citizen bodies of other Greek city-states, the Spartiates were absolutely uninterested in bringing other people up into the Spartiate caste. Part of this is because they didn't want to share their wealth, share the land. Their wealth is based on land. And part of it is probably due to something not very different from what we would call a kind of racialized notion of who could be a Spartiate and who could not.
Did you say, did I get the timeline on this was 700 years? Is that what the timeline was? The Aristotle timeline of population decline?
Oh no, he starts from probably around 500. His first figure of 10,000 or so Spartiate men is from, I guess, around 500 BC, maybe a little bit before that. We know for a fact from Herodotus that there's 8,000 around 480 BC. And then we know pretty well from Aristotle writing in the 330s BC that it's down to, I think, something like 1,000.
So like a 200
basically
year timeline.
In the period between the earthquake of the 460s and let's just say the 340s or so, we have a gigantic drop in men, adult citizen status men of Sparta, full citizen Spartiates. So keep in mind that the Spartiates are the ones who the Spartiates receive some parcels of land at birth. Seems to be distributed by the state, although there may be some other mechanisms of distribution, maybe some private ownership. It looks like it's state distributed. And then they also undergo intensive education, including many military aspects. They're taken away from their home to undergo an intense military education for years and years and years and years before they're eventually allowed to get married and start a household of their own. So
I have a question too. I'm sorry. Continue on. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
No, I was just gonna say that they are an elite in terms of the education that they receive, which has a lot of military stuff. It also has poetry and things like that, specific poetry by the two Spartan poets, and they're an elite in terms of their privileges of the land that they inherit. And they're also an elite in terms of their complete rule over a subject population of slaves known as the Helots. So a Spartiate doesn't really have to lift a finger for work. The Helots will farm for him. They will bring him produce in wagons, et cetera, et cetera. All he has to do is practice military stuff, go hunting, go horseback riding, and occasionally go on a military campaign.
So the like the slave underclass, they don't fight the wars, just the Spartans do. They're like noble warriors.
The Spartans are a picture-perfect example of an aristocratic warrior caste, like you later see with the Shogun or something like that. The Helot slaves will occasionally go on campaign as extra. I almost want to say cannon fodder, but that's probably too extreme.
That was the word I was thinking of, because they sent them in first without weapons.
Not exactly. We're not really sure about that one. Probably it's considered a position of honor for the Spartiate to be in front. He's one of the promachoi, which means the forefighters. And there's a big sort of emphasis in Spartan poetry. This is Tertius, the famous 7th century BC Spartan poet, on how important it is to be one of the promachoi and be in front. And if you get hurt, you have to have your wound in the front of you, not in the back of you, because if it's in the back of you, that means that you're running away. And of course, we have the famous come back with your shield and or on it. That's a sort of apophthegma. There's a word for you, of the Spartan mom. Come back with your shield or
the Spartan mom.
Basically, when you died in a Spartan battle, they would put your body on your shield and they would drag you back so that you could have funerary rites back in Sparta.
But then there's also a number of gravestones that are outside of Sparta, so we're not entirely sure about that. So we actually have gravestones, and all it says is a name, and then it says "en polemo," which means in war. There's nothing else. The Spartans were notoriously brief in their.
So I have a question. So I know in Roman society, they had like daily rations when you were in Rome, right? You would get like a loaf of bread and
that was
like
very
I think
popular
a coin
amongst the poor people.
But you would get like a loaf of bread and like a coin, and that was like they pay you to be a Roman citizen with this stuff. Did Greek have anything similar? Like, did they take care of their less fortunate?
So you're talking about social welfare amongst Greek city-states in general? Okay. So keep in mind that there's 1,000 or so Greek city-states. So Sparta and Athens and Corinth are the most famous ones, but there's 1,000 by 500 BC. There's 1,000. There's 1,500. 150 years later, they just keep sprouting up everywhere. Black Sea, Mediterranean Sea. There are social welfare mechanisms that exist in some of these Greek city-states, but typically you have to have, in many of them, you have to be of a certain property class in order to be a full citizen who has the ability to vote.
Well, wasn't it also like an honor to pay taxes?
Yeah, it was. So there's an ideology in which basically what you have is not exactly taxes, but contributions that are levied on the wealthier citizens. And there's an ideology that is attempted to be constructed whereby the wealthier citizens should see it as an honor to be, financing the building of a warship for their city-state. So they tried to push this as a great honor, and you'd see honorific, pillars and things like that. So-and-so, son of so-and-so, financed a trireme for his people, blah, 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 blah. So
but they also did that for temples and stuff too, that were
absolutely. Yeah. This is a great mechanism to get rich people to pay, but it's less of a tax and more of a special contribution levied on a person. And so some people started to dread this being levied on them. They're bleeding us dry. I can't believe these Democrats are bleeding us dry. That would be the kind of thing that they would say. But did you guys want to talk about Homer?
Yes.
So I'm open to talk about all of it. Like I said, I just love history.
Wait. We're talking about Homer the poet and not Homer the cartoon character.
Homer, the
Oh,
cartoon
wait a
character,
second.
was named after Homer the
I was
poet.
misled.
No, the cartoon character was actually named after a character in a play from the 1930s.
Oh, well, then I was wrong.
Yeah, but that I would say that everyone else between that play and the Iliad and the Odyssey were named after the composer of the Iliad and the Odyssey. So,
Okay.
yeah.
Yes.
Now,
I
okay.
love
Now I
the
have a
Odyssey.
question. I have a question too about that. So I know with like places like the Dead Sea Scrolls and stuff, we're finding fragments of writings, right? And I'm using the Dead Sea Scrolls as an example, but we find fragments everywhere, right? I heard that the Iliad and the Odyssey were 2 books of like a 10 or 12 book set that was like the entire history of Greece, which is why we don't have the Trojan Wars history, because it's like missing between the 2 books. Have we found fragments of those books?
Okay, so the deal, the best way to think about that's not quite right. The best way to think about it is this. So the Iliad,
I told you my understanding of history is kind of sparse, but I love it.
That's why you got me on the show to help out with stuff. So there's a lot. I don't know most history at all. The stuff I do know is primarily Greek and Roman and a little bit of Egyptian. The 2 compositions that we refer to as the Iliad and the Odyssey were probably composed orally by someone with an amazing memory, and probably these were a rewrite, so to speak, a recomposition of older legendary songs combined together into 2 big long works that conformed more or less to established mythology about a war at Troy, okay, and the aftermath thereof. So we refer to the composer of these 2 very long songs as Homer as a kind of placeholder name, okay? We have 0 information about who the composer was. Usually he's regarded as an illiterate, like Tom Waits type of bard with an amazing memory. But it's possible that he wrote them down at the very beginning of writing, when writing was introduced into ancient Greece. Keep in mind that you have Mycenaean civilization ending in the Bronze Age collapse between 1200 and 1100 BC, and they lost their system of writing. No one in Greece knew how to write after that. The scribes must have died, and so the Greeks then adopt a kind of Northwest Semitic script, kind of a Phoenician style script, and they adapt that to their own language, their own spoken language. And so
that's the script that's on the Rosetta Stone, right?
Well, there's 3 scripts on the Rosetta Stone. One is hieroglyphs, one is a later form of Egyptian, and then
the Coptic.
And then one is the standard Greek. But that's from that's from hundreds of years after we first start to see the Greek language written in the Greek, what we will call the Greek alphabet, which we start to see that in the middle of the 8th century BC, so like around 750 BC. Probably by 700 BC, we get a more or less fixed text for the Iliad and the Odyssey that someone wrote down. It certainly got written down at the very, very latest in the 6th century BC. So we have 2 gigantic fixed texts. The usual question would be, if these existed in an oral pre-literate form, how the devil could anybody possibly memorize such long texts? We do have analogies of Serbian bards that were interviewed and recorded in the 1930s who actually could memorize very, very long text, almost as long as the Iliad and the Odyssey, but they would improvise a little bit like a jazz musician improvises. So there would be a little bit of scope for improvisation, okay? But like jazz music, there is a kind of beat that they're sticking to, and that's how Homer's poetry works. The fact that the stuff was written in poetry, with a certain meter, that aids in the memorization. And in fact, a lot of people would argue that meter was invented, that poetry and meter were invented to aid in memorization. So what we do have, there are other long poems that are indeed lost, that are part of a kind of Trojan War cycle. We have quotations from some of those in later authors.
Okay.
And then
so only the quotes. We don't have fragments written down like the Iliad and the Odyssey, which were written down.
We have the entirety of the Iliad and the Odyssey. We have the whole damn thing. Okay, so what we have are quotes. Sometimes, just to confuse things more, quotes are referred to as fragments. So the word fragments can mean an actual chunk of papyrus or with an inscription, or it can mean quotes that are embedded in other texts. That's kind of a confusing double usage of the word fragments. It's kind of like
it's understandable. I mean, from a historical context, when somebody like, I'm trying to think. In Christianity, there was cardinals and stuff that were writing against magic and magicians in ancient Rome in AD, after Christ, right? And so they're writing about the heresies of Gnostic religions and things like that, and that's where we get our understanding of Gnostic religions, because nothing was written down by them.
Right. Exactly right.
But it's also colored by who wrote about it, because they're biased by going, "Ooh, these awful magicians and their blah blah blah," Well,
I can give you actually another comparandum to add to that. Many of the early Masonic rituals, since those were, when they were written down, they were only written down in some kind of messed up code. Many of them we would not know, except for anti-Masonic activists who somehow captured them and wrote them down. And so it's through these anti-Masonic texts that we actually have some of the more oddball Masonic rituals written down. One of my very best friends is a extremely hardcore Masonic scholar. So he's an actual expert. He's also a Freemason.
Does he want my dad's books?
Pardon me?
My dad died last year, and he was a Mason, and I got a stack of books of all the code and stuff. Does he want them?
Yeah.
I don't know who wants them. And
he's actually in Vallejo. He would definitely want them. Are you in the Bay Area?
No, I'm actually in Denver, but we'll talk after the show, and I'll just I'll have to find them. I don't remember where I put them, but yeah, they're about this big, and I got a stack of maybe about 4 or 5 different books, and it's how to translate the code. And then there's a bunch of books of like written in code, and I have no idea what because I haven't sat down to look at it. According to Masonic tradition, women aren't supposed to look at that stuff.
Right.
So,
There's the mainstream American Freemasonry. The mainstream one is there is an oath that is taken at the 3rd degree, in which a Mason is not supposed to. But there are other Masonic bodies that consider themselves legitimate, much smaller than the main Masonic body in the USA. There are other Masonic bodies in the USA, especially in places like France and elsewhere in Europe, that absolutely allow women into Masonry. And
there's also the Sisters of the Morning Star, which is a Masonic kind of subset that's just for women to practice Masonic.
Right. There's also 2 for girls, for younger girls. One is for girls that are quite young. One's for like kind of teenage girls. The Rainbow Daughters or something like that.
So I'm all about like let's share secrets and stuff. And if this guy wants, if they will be useful to him, I don't know. He probably has something very similar.
I'm not sure.
I'm right. You're gonna get death threats for that, or like the Masons gonna try and stop that happening. You're gonna end up in the middle of the Da Vinci Code. That's
I don't understand.
No, you'd be giving them to the guy that I'm talking about is not only a Masonic scholar with a master's degree in history, but he's also a Freemason. So he can.
So he will appreciate the fact that I'm keeping it within the Masonic.
That you're keeping it with. It's like the magician's fraternity.
Just don't mention she was willing to give them to just anybody.
I didn't give them to the library. The library wanted them, and I'm like, they're supposed to be secret teachings.
The library didn't want them. Is that what you said?
No, the library wanted them. There's a library here in Aurora, Colorado, that. It's cool. They have like a desk where you can bring books and they'll pay you for the books, right? So that they can expand their library. And so stuff that I want to get rid of. And those books happened to be in there, and they really wanted them. Like the girls, like, oh my gosh, I can't believe you have a whole set of Mason books. And I'm like, I'm gonna hold on to those.
Yeah, they're trying to. Oh, we got it. Yeah, you won't find this information in a library, kids. You got to join the Masons.
Yeah.
Or watch this show.
Free Mason stuff, y'all. Well, what's interesting about the Freemasons is that, you know, they're called the Freemasons for a reason. Like, they protected Masonic practices in construction. Like they you know, things like plumb lines and, you know, how to lay brick and how to mix mortar and stuff like that. They actually protected this knowledge so that it would ensure that they had future work. Right, because if they shared the knowledge, then other people would do those jobs, right? But if you kept it with the Masons, and then it got religious, it's weird.
The way that Freemasons would describe it is that you have the distinction is between operative Masons who actually do stonework, and then Freemasons who kind of borrowed at some point. I'm thinking it's in the 18th century, kind of maybe 17th, kind of borrowed some of the secret symbolism of the operative Masons who were hiding their secrets, and they started a gentleman's philosophical society with some mystical contents and lots of ritual. And so they sort of
and that was the same time as the formation of the Illuminati, right? Because they wanted to educate women, and I'm trying to remember well, the actual Illuminati had some ideas that would be considered progressive today.
The movie to see is actually available on Amazon, and it's done by 3 Freemasons, 2 of whom I know, and it's called Illuminated, and it's actually the best documentary on the Illuminati. And one of them is Adam Kendall. Another one is a guy named Joseph Weges from Texas. Another guy is named, I can't remember his name. He's kind of a rock star kind of person, but they're all Masons, and they actually did research into the Illuminati. So I would recommend that movie. I've watched it. It's quite interesting.
I don't know what to make of I like secret societies. I mean, aren't Freemasons? That's a secret society, right?
Okay, full disclosure. I am a Freemason. I am a 32nd degree Scottish Rite Freemason.
Then I'm
why would anyone want to be a Mason, and why would anyone be against someone being a Mason?
Well,
because it's fun and interesting to think about these. Okay, I'm under oaths not to repeat certain things. I have not actually gone to lodge in a few years, but I can tell you why I was interested in becoming a Mason. This was a number of years ago. I was interested because I had several friends who were Masons, and because I thought that the sort of ritual and mysticism around Masonry was fascinating. I thought that the history was quite fascinating as well. Mm-hmm. So that's why I did that, and I will admit that the absence of women was not something that I particularly liked. I generally enjoy being around women. I'm a big fan of women. So
my brother was going to become a Freemason because again, my father was one, and when that came up that he couldn't share anything with his wife, he's like, nah, this isn't for me.
I just, for me personally, red flags start to come up when you have a whole bunch of men working in secrecy. I feel like generally that doesn't work out. I mean, I'm not sure that that's what's happening with you, Timothy. And and obviously I know very little about Freemasons, but whenever there's a secret society, that to me draws some type of flag. Maybe it's not red. Maybe it's like a slightly red flag. But I always think I always think this is a recipe for something not good happening.
Well, I mean, the way I would say it is this: there have always been groups of men. There's a certain enjoyment that men can get out of being in a fraternal order where it's just fellow men around. Women have their own orders where there are women around. So I don't see much use for it myself. And I will. The biggest thing I can say about Freemasonry now is that when I joined, I was hoping that there would be mystical things and it would be like Mithraism or something. But it's more like a bunch of very ordinary guys who are kind of do-gooders and who enjoy being in a room with guys and doing reciting sort of memorized texts that give philosophical lessons, moral, philosophical, and religious lessons. It really is a kind of do-gooder society. It's not the rituals are I was raised in the Catholic tradition, and they had good rituals, but the Masons blow those out of the water. So they do amazing things with the rituals. You do get the feeling that you are in a kind of elect group, but the messages given in the rituals are messages of being a good person, a moral person that literally every sensible person would agree with. And don't cheat, don't lie, don't cheat anyone else out of the value of anything, that sort of thing. So it's not the case that they're doing anything nefarious. They do things like baseball glove drives, mitts for Masons, or Masons for mitts, or something like that, where they actually generate money to give leather baseball mitts to needy children. I'm not kidding. They have an ophthalmology clinic where they actually have money that they donate for eye surgery for needy children. You can look this up. This is completely correct. So it is essentially a do-gooder, a male do-gooder club that has an old history, old-ish, and probably before World War II, the members were more elite, more educated. But after World War II, basically anyone and his dad could join, and it would be a place to go. Hate to say this, but it would be a place to go where you could get away from your wife and you could hang out with other guys. And so that's
D&D, folks. All these things also apply to Dungeons and Dragons. I wish more women played Dungeons and Dragons. Well, nowadays they do, so it's good.
I'm accepted at a Dungeons and Dragons table. But okay, I want to get back to ancient Rome, all right? Sure. And I want to get back to ancient Greece and stuff. And Mason's very fascinating. I watch a YouTube channel called Religion for Breakfast. I don't know if you're familiar with it.
No.
But it's a scholarly look at different religious practices throughout history and throughout the world and stuff. And it's like, this is where the idea of angels came from, right? This is where, it talks about like Gnostic religions. And again, that's where I glean that information that we only really know about them from what other people wrote about them. And so his emphasis is more on religion and the evolution of religion, right? And so from your experience and stuff like that, how have you seen that affect? Because, how do I word this? Like in ancient Rome, they basically borrowed like the Greek gods, right? They had, Jupiter and Saturn and all these different gods. But like, again, that was an evolution of Greek?
Not exactly. They both come from the same root, which is the gods of the Proto-Indo-Europeans, a group living around 5000 BC.
And those were the ones that believed in the sky god.
Yeah, so the sky god is Zeus. In fact, the word Zeus and the Jew and Jupiter come from the same root, which means the bright day, the bright sky. And then you have Deus Pitar in Sanskrit. So the Proto-Indo-Europeans are sort of the origin of the Sanskrit pantheon, the Greek pantheon, the Roman pantheon. The groups of Indo-Europeans who went west and ended up going into Italy, they settled in various places. One of them was in Latium on the west coast, and in one of the cities of Latium is, of course, Rome. So they're using ancestral deities that originally, if we could put down a root, would be in literally Ukraine, 5000 BC or so. So these are the descendants of those. And then there is what you can say is that Greek and Roman gods come from the same source originally. And then when the Greeks and Romans start to really, really have social intercourse, economic intercourse, let's just call it 350 BC or so, then these ancestral gods, which had drifted apart over the hundreds of years, start to come back together, and the Romans start to look at the extremely elaborated Greek mythology and sort of adopt it. Oh, well, our Diana is so close to Artemis. Our Jupiter is obviously the same as Zeus. Our Juno is obviously very close to Hera. but they had their own sort of meanings, their little differences. For example, the Roman god Neptune had become a god of streams, not a god of seas or oceans. Poseidon was not really a stream god; he was a god of the sea. But the Roman Neptune starts to become a god of the sea, and then in the late 1st century BC, you have a grand effort at synthesis of the two traditions by Roman poets. Like Ovid is an obvious one, and they start bringing them together and presenting the Greek and Roman gods as a continuous sort of single stream of stuff. So that took a certain amount of crocheting the things together and that sort of thing. And there's some clumsy moments in it, and it's the same kind of thing as when you look at the way that the ancient Roman story of Rome being a confection of two brothers named Romulus and Remus, that gets stitched onto the Trojan War story of Aeneas leaving Troy and then coming over to Italy and establishing a town there.
So did Rome just grow very quickly? Is that something about it? It was sort of founded and it grew, or was it sort of around for a long time and suddenly became the power? I mean, what happened there?
We have evidence of settlements on those hills, on the 7 hills, from about 1000 BC onward. But in the legend, it's 753 BC that the city itself was founded. It was certainly very, very big and very impressive by 550 BC. This is absolutely evident in the archaeological record. In the legend, it starts in 753 BC as a settlement for refugees, vagabonds, ex-slaves, sort of people like that. What's interesting about the Roman foundation myth of the Romans themselves is that in their own story of their own city, it starts as a polyglot, multicultural group of vagabonds. There are some aristocrats, but it's not aristocratic. You contrast this with the Athenian, the official Athenian origin story of Athens. That is a completely different story where they say, we're the Athenians. We've been here forever. We are autochthonous. We were born from the soil. We're not immigrants from somewhere else.
Yeah.
The Roman story is very pro-immigrant. The Athenian story is
that's making me think that Romulus and Remus probably just came from the settlements that were already there, and that Athenians probably weren't there very long, and so they had to make a big fuss.
Make a big fuss.
Well, I mean, going back with Rome, Rome itself was very metropolitan.
Yeah,
anybody could become a Roman citizen. Anybody, like even slaves could become a Roman citizen. There was a path to that.
Right, and I would say, and this is funny because the Emperor Claudius actually did a speech about this. The strength of Rome was the way that it was inclusive of foreigners, and he says that the Athenian Empire and the Spartan Empire were doomed to failure because of their lack of inclusivity. It's the most sort of woke.
Yes, kind of diversity for health.
I was wondering if America might have picked up on some of these myths and written them into, because America's got a very similar thing going on, right?
America does. You compare it with a place like Japan. Do you think someone who looks like me could move to Japan and then be considered
Japanese? Always be a gaijin.
When I was in Japan, I noticed that they had a diversity of Japanese people and nobody else.
Yeah.
I mean,
it's funny because I'm pretty left-wing politically, but it's funny because the left. However, having said that, I'm allowed to criticize the left. The left is always going on and on about how racist the USA is, and I'm just like, in world history, I have never seen a society, I've never even read of one that had so many different people in it living pretty peacefully together. And of course, there are terrible flare-ups of violence. I've read all about it. I'm a historian, but there's really pretty much no society in world history that is as open as the USA. Ancient Rome would be maybe the closest, but most societies are much more closed and much more exclusive. You want people that look like this, that speak this language. So it's funny.
That's a good point. You don't hear much about ever.
My favorite part of the city of Rome's history is after, or I should say during the fall of the Roman Empire, when Constantine moved the capital to Constantinople, right? Rome just collapsed, right? And you had, from a period of like 60 years, you had something like 5 or 6 million people living in Rome, and it went down to less than 1 million.
Yeah,
so it was like a ghost town for the people that stayed there.
I don't think it was quite that dramatic, but you do certainly see people moving out. The center of economy is elsewhere, but not a lot of people are going to move all the way to Constantinople. That's far.
No.
You're going to have there are still plenty of elites in the city of Rome. One of the big problems in that period is people moving out of cities in general, particularly wealthy people. They move out of city, they stop paying taxes, they move to their little estates, their little villas in the countryside where they have their own blacksmith, they have their own armed guard, they have all that they need. And then if tax collectors come along, they can push them away. And if brigands come along, they can push them away. And this is what starts a lot of these medieval villas. They start as Roman aristocrats moving out to the countryside and becoming self-sufficient. Yeah.
So you're saying Rome fell due to suburbs?
Yeah, but they're creating their own walled communities in the suburbs.
Enclaves.
Yeah, they're enclaves, and this leads to a death of civic life, and I mean the word civic in both senses. Okay, the civic life.
Then we go into the Dark Ages.
Are they leaving the cities because they're like the taxes are too damn high?
That's part of it. Yeah, that's definitely. and they feel that the taxes are too high, and the other thing is they themselves have enough money to where it's possible to leave the cities, to where it's possible to just go and start. They have enough retainers, enough money, enough everything to just start their own villa in the countryside.
Now, also, didn't disease, because you would have waves of disease in cities, so it's safer to be
in the countryside.
Of that.
Right. Pathogens love population density. The recent book to read is by Kyle Harper. It's called The Fate of Rome. He's a scholar in Oklahoma, and he is very, very good. And he can explain, how malaria works in detail. He has having come from the same kind of education as me. He's moved into biology at a fine degree. I admire this very, very, very much. So he's an expert on malaria. The other one would be Walter Scheidel, who just had lunch here 2 days ago, who wrote a book called Death on the Nile. Not the Agatha Christie novel, but it's about malaria in Roman Egypt. And then the other one is, what is his name? Robert Salares. He wrote a book just called Malaria in Rome.
So is malaria in Rome being spread by mosquitoes?
It's mosquitoes, and Walter Scheidel has shown that it was the habit of the aristocrats to leave the city of Rome, go into the cooler countryside in the exact months where there were sort of in the exact months every single year when the mosquitoes were worse. And they would also live up in the hilltops where there were fewer mosquitoes. Mosquitoes don't like high altitude.
I mean,
yes, I know. I live in Denver. It's awesome.
It's weird because malaria used to be a problem in the U.S. and you don't hear about it at all. But there was a problem where they thought they'd never get malaria out of the U.S. And I'm not exactly sure. I suspect it has to do with probably mosquito habitat destruction. I'm not exactly sure why it's not a problem anymore, but it was.
It was a problem in Los Angeles for several summers. It was a problem that we had problems in East Los Angeles, and we had roving trucks of CDC.
What year? Recent?
Within the last 5 years, we had roving trucks of CDC personnel going around and literally looking around for crappy pools of water. Right where I live now, I live right near Long Beach now. Last summer, my next door neighbor, very nice lady, there was mosquitoes coming in, and she had a rain barrel. And I just texted her and I said, I think your rain barrel is now a mosquito breeding zone. So she had her workers empty it out into the lawn.
They don't need much. I mean, in San Francisco, all you need is some potted plants that have sitting water and they can start breeding.
Exactly right.
So
but San Francisco used to be
living in Denver. No mosquitoes. Awesome.
I remember when I first moved to San Francisco in 1, I guess, I remember the first thing I noticed was that nobody had to have screens in their windows because there were no houseflies. And I come from LA, where there were houseflies everywhere. And so I remember and I hated houseflies. I hated them so much. And I remember being in San Francisco and saying, oh my God, this is a city for me. Houseflies don't breed here.
Yeah, I thought that was weird too when I showed up. I'm like, where are the screens, y'all? You're going to get bitten up.
I think
And mostly it's not a problem.
Yeah, my house had screens, but after a while I realized we didn't really need them.
No. Yeah, what are you going to get? A dragonfly once every 5 years or something?
They steal your soul, right? What do they do?
Yeah, we get dragonflies. So we get some big dragonflies sometimes. But we get mozzies once in a while.
Let's go back to the ancient world.
Okay.
All
what
right,
questions
so-
would you like to ask? You want to talk more
Again, my jam is like Bronze Age, collapse,
Right,
sea
right.
peoples.
Yeah,
So
sure.
what do you know about the sea people?
Right. So the term
Sea peoples.
Sea peoples.
Yeah. Oh, they don't know who they were. That's why they call them sea peoples.
Well, okay, so we actually have a bit more evidence than that. So I'm happy to say. So the deal with the sea peoples is the term comes from an Egyptian inscription. I think it's at Medinet Habu. There are 2 invasions of sea
That's the
peoples.
one with Ramsey fighting them off, right?
Yeah,
Like the big wall. Yeah.
Right. Big, huge smiting pose. The smiting pose that exists through thousands of years of Egyptian art. So there is a reference to the sea peoples in their coalitions coming in their boats. There's a very good illustration from the period in which you can see that they brought their children, their wives, and their domestic animals. So this is not just like a warrior band. This is a population movement. Okay. And so this is occurring. There's one attack, I think around 1210, and another one in the 1180s against Egypt. And these are very, very serious. And one of the ideas here that's kind of old now is that since this is referred to as the end of the Bronze Age and the beginning of the Iron Age, this is when iron tools and iron weapons start to appear in the archaeological record. One of the theories is that these coalitions of peoples now for the first time could arm themselves. They armed themselves with iron. And as you all know, bronze is actually tricky to make because it requires 2 elements, copper and tin. Tin is actually not very easy to find. And you have to, there are only a couple of sources of tin around the Mediterranean. One's in the British Isles of all places. But iron is everywhere. So if you can get over your distaste for the uglier appearance of iron, you can mine iron anywhere. And there are deposits of it everywhere. Okay, so iron is very, very easy to get a hold of. So if you have an army of guys with iron weapons, it's not going to be as prestigious as an army of guys with beautiful glittering bronze weapons, but they're going to kill people just as well. So that's a slightly older theory. Basically, I think the dominant theory now is
my understanding was that it was an immigration, and they called them like, "Oh no, we're being attacked," but really, what it was, like, from my understanding, is Europe, north of the Mediterranean, but kind of southern Europe, had like an earthquake or some kind of natural disaster, and the people left that area, and then basically went to where, Egypt was, and Turkey, and, around the Suez Canal and that kind of area, because that was a prosperous area and they wanted better lives. That's my understanding, but I could be wrong.
It couldn't have been an earthquake because that would have been too localized. The evidence now is that it was a drought. So you have a drought probably in the central Mediterranean, possibly in the eastern Mediterranean. And then you have people going in boats trying to go to places where there's food. And Egypt is an obvious one. It's the powerhouse of the Mediterranean, very established civilization. The sea peoples went along the coasts. Right now you see Ugarit, the very famous city of Syria. It gets destroyed. Mycenaean Greece, all of the citadels seem to be attacked, or almost all of them. Population drops drastically. And then you have the Hittite Empire is taken down. This means the sea peoples must have gone considerably inland, not just attacking coastal sites. Egypt was too strong to actually fall. It would suffer, but they're not going to. Their economy is just too strong. What is interesting is that we have the names of the different nations that the Egyptian records, that Egyptian texts give us regarding the compositions of the sea peoples, and we have a bunch of geographical names.
Okay,
and some of these, it's extremely cool, and some of these probably correspond to specific places. So you have the Chequer, which are thought to be the people of Sicily. You have the Equesh, which is probably the Achaioi, which is the Greeks. Homer uses the term Achaioi for Greeks. Very similar Equesh in Egyptian for this group of people. And then the Hittite chronicles call this the Achiawa. So this seems to be a kind of sound with some vowels afterwards, a W in there somewhere. So we have a bunch of these, and this is probably where you so you have a set of migrations, people probably fleeing drought. They don't have food, and they're going to places where there is food, and they are kind of acting opportunistically. The cities that they attack will say, no, you can't come here. We have a finite supply of food. We can't just give all of the food to everyone else. And you're saying, yes, it's an immigration. Absolutely right. It seems to be a population immigration, but population immigrations are sometimes referred to as invasions now. So there you go. So I don't think it's the case that we should say the cities that were being attacked or visited by armed bands, that they were being selfish and cruel to not give food out. They were probably tight on food themselves. What are you going to do if someone's attacking your city? So we see evidence of fires accompanying these kinds of attacks, and some clay tablets in Mycenaean Greece actually got inadvertently fired from this, and so that has helped these things to be preserved. I believe there are tablets on Cyprus and in Ugarit that also suffered this. So you're seeing a general systems collapse in the Eastern Mediterranean between 1200 and 1100 BC.
Now I have another question too, and this is completely off topic.
Okay.
Is it true that that Alexander the Great burned down the Persian Empire because he was drunk?
No, so what you're talking about is
but that's a spurious rumor.
So he and his soldiers burned down one city, Persepolis.
Okay.
Yeah, so the Persian Empire was the biggest empire known to humankind up to that point. So there's
Just one city.
Yeah, there's no way you can
Persepolis was the center of the Persian Empire.
Right. So, but that's probably one or two districts in one city that got burned. Yeah, and that is a drunken encounter. But
yeah, because like basically like a prostitute told him like you should burn the city, and he was like drunk, like yeah, let's burn the city, woo!
You never know. You never know whether to believe stories about stuff that prostitutes say that are sort of so.
Hey, Tim,
really, because they took out the Book of Mary Magdalene because of that reason.
That sounds like a conspiratorial theory.
No, I watched the show, or I watched the channel Religion for Breakfast, and he talks about different books that were taken out of the Bible, like.
Well, I would love to read the Book of Mary Magdalene. That sounds.
There's a Book of Mary Magdalene. There's the Book of Enoch. There's actually two books of Enoch that were removed from the Bible.
Yeah, there's only fragments. There's only fragments.
And then there's the something of Judas. There's
the Gospel according to Judas.
Yeah, there's a Gospel of Judas as
well.
Gospel
of Judas. I've heard of that one.
He should get his turn. I mean, we really haven't heard his side of the story.
Yeah, they found a lot of stuff up in the Dead Sea Scrolls, where the Dead Sea, like they found a lot of fakes, but they found a lot of real things. So I think there's quite a lot of sort through. But yeah,
I'd like to point out something important to the viewers, though. We glossed over the fact.
Yeah, Dan, you mean viewer?
Okay, the viewer.
Hi, Mom.
Don't believe what
Tina.
Prostitutes tell you. Okay.
Well, I'm just saying a third or fourth hand story about that is attributed to a group of people for which most of these writers probably had contempt. It doesn't sound terribly credible. I don't know.
So going back to the Gospel of Judas, okay? So according to the sources that I've read, what the Gospel of Judas says is that Jesus knew he needed to be martyred. And so he goes to Judas and he says, you have to betray me so that I'm serious. This is what they said, is that you have to betray me so that my ideas will live beyond my life. And that's the only way that the ideas will persist. And Judas is like, no, I don't want to betray you. And Jesus is like, no, you have to betray me. And so Judas, in a later book, goes and, kisses him and gets his 40 pieces of silver. And and then he feels so guilty that he hangs himself.
Mm-hmm.
And so, like,
yeah, he does feel guilty. Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean,
well,
this
again,
story
that's
adds up. Actually, I think
it's interesting.
it does. I mean, it adds up. But that puts Jesus as a really sophisticated kind of myth maker, or propaganda artist.
Well,
like he'd be killing it on TikTok.
Bible. There's a story about Jesus playing in a water pool when he's a little kid with there's another kid that messes with his water pool, and so Jesus curses the kid, and Joseph, when he finds out about this, grabs Jesus's ear, because he's like 8 years old or something, grabs his ear and drags him back to basically uncurse the kid and apologize. And that's one of the stories that was removed from the Bible.
I could see why they'd remove that.
Yeah, they left out. Yeah, they were quite selective. They left out all the more,
I find the Dead Sea Scrolls very fascinating, because you find a lot of repeats of things in the Dead Sea Scrolls. But William Irwin Thompson has this theory that every version of a myth has some validity to it because they were derived from oral tradition. So,
my theory that if it happens in fiction, it might as well have happened in real life.
But if there's two people that listen to an oral tradition and they memorize it, and then they go off into their various city states or whatever, we talked about this. It might change a little bit, the story, the oral tradition, because their memory may not be exactly right, or they're improvising a part or whatever. Well, if you keep repeating that process, the story evolves until eventually you have two different versions of the myth, or multiple versions of the myth. So William Irwin Thompson says that most historians will try and find the quote-unquote true myth. Try and find the one that's the oldest, that's the most complete version of the myth. But he says that you can't discount these other, like, quote-unquote false myths, because they're going to contain things from their regions that are important to their regions, right? And they're still the same as valid as the quote-unquote core myth. And I don't know, like, I read a lot of random stuff, but I kind of think there's some validity to that idea.
Well, I would say that the most interesting book that I've read on myth recently is by Witzel, Witzel. It's called The Origins of the World's Mythologies. And he's actually making the extremely bold argument, and he's a Sanskritologist originally, but he's making the extremely bold argument that the similarities found in the myths of different, very, very, very distant regions on Earth actually,
like the flood myth. There's a flood myth in almost every single region in Europe and Africa and Asia. Contain stories of the flood.
The question is whether whether it's found in the Americas, because that would indicate a truly old origin prior to.
I thought they had. I was watching the First Peoples on PBS series, and they were saying that there was a deep commonality of myth, and it was all shared from the Beringian people, and then the Beringians, and then they came through, and very quickly they were saying on this show that they flooded the continent. Yeah.
There's no evidence for continental floods, but what Witzel's arguing is that these myths were carried by Paleolithic peoples. So we're talking, and that there was some sort of stable body of myths, including hero twins, including flood myths, including the idea of 4 or 5 ages of man before the current age. That appears in Aztec mythology as well, Mayan mythology. So there's some sort of core of myths of peoples that are carried over the Bering Strait and into the Americas, and these still survive in Inca, Maya, Aztec at the very, very minimum. So that's pretty fascinating. But then Witzel also argues that there's another set of myths that is even older than that and more basic than that. And those exist, believe it or not, he says, this is impossible to prove, in places like Australia, amongst the Aboriginal Australian peoples. That migration is something like 60,000 years ago. So it's hard to imagine a myth maintaining any stability for so much time. But at the same time, the Polynesian people, they didn't believe for a long time, made it as far as they did when they did with boats, right? And it's only really in recent times that people go, wow, they really did sail that far.
And
Sure,
the genetic research showed
right.
that the genes that sort of come out of Africa, then they show up again very quickly, you know, and in the Aboriginal, and they sort of show that the path
a
along
very
the sort of
early
southern-
migration.
the early migration, which I think that fits my theory that, you know, when we see a beautiful beach and we go, oh, that looks like paradise. I think we spent a long time like just going around beaches and swimming, and that's probably why we lost all our fur. Because we were in the sea and we would pick fruit and it was all very nice. It was very pleasant for a while.
Fur in the sea, yeah. We don't need fur in the sea.
Tim, is there another theory about these like myths that seem to be universal, where they just came out of the environment and basically humans, wherever they're living, they experience the sun, they experience the cycle of nature, they experience floods, and the commonality is the environmental.
Sure. I mean that is, I would say that is that has to be true. That's commonsensically true. But the question is whether there is certain specificity in myths, because of course people are going to say, the sun warms me, it's nice, and people are going to experience floods everywhere. There's going to be floods everywhere. But the question is there a flood myth that has a man and woman who build a boat, and they're given a sign in the sky, and there's a bird. Okay, so when you have something like that, you know that there's probably a shared origin. So in Sumerian myth, there is a flood myth. So this is vastly earlier than the Noah stuff from the
in Gilgamesh.
In Gilgamesh. Yeah, there's a guy named Utnapishtim, and his wife's name I can't remember now. She's a very sympathetic character in the Gilgamesh cycle or stories.
Yeah, and so Adam and Eve. Adam and Eve's much sexier too.
Right. Yeah. So, and then if we have a more specific thing like that, then we're more tempted to say, okay, this is not just a reflection on the bounty of nature. This is some kind of really, really old story. And so we see Noah and his wife figures in the Deucalion and Pyrrha myth, which is a Greek flood myth. But that's not hard to imagine, because that's, the Greeks are very near the Hebrews, so it's a very short distance for a myth to travel. But if we get something like that in amongst the Maya, then we know there's something very interesting going on that cannot be attributed to just coincidence. That would be the argument that would
saying, like, if you're in a place where flooding wouldn't happen, and you've got this myth in your culture, where did it come from? Yeah,
that would be a thing. That would be a thing. But also, if you just have more specific stories that are weirdly similar to this sort of Mesopotamian stories, then you might say, okay, that sounds too strange for coincidence. Yeah, I would urge you all to at least look at Witzel's book again, The Origins of the World's Mythologies. It's really quite great. And
I'm going to add it to my reading list.
If any of you liked Joseph Campbell, one of the things that I liked about Joseph Campbell, he's gotten a lot of guff in the past 30 years, but one of the things that I liked about him,
he got guff because of George Lucas. George Lucas went, this is my thing, and everyone went, oh, that's how you write an epic origin. And then
he got guff from Camille Paglia in the early 90s. She was saying that he had sort of sanitized the myths and made them all be about, good stuff and heroes and stuff. And Camille Paglia, in her book Sexual Persona, I thought that he was just being kind of a naive wasp, I think. But one thing that I liked about
so
Campbell,
she said it's more sexy than he de-sexified it all.
And bloodier, sexy and sicker. And
no. Star Wars is a Freudian nightmare.
Yeah,
Star Wars is all about sex. But it's all symbolic.
Mm-hmm.
I thought it was about nuclear power.
The fact that the main storyline is about incest is nothing to do.
It's all about sex. It's all about sex. Everything.
Well, it's about nuclear power too.
Not very sexy.
I guess it depends on. Yeah, it's not very sexy.
Really, you don't think
Star Wars?
That one of the nuclear bombs that dropped on Hiroshima was called the Big Boy? You don't think that has sexual origins?
It's all sex. It's all sex. I mean, like as we mentioned, every teenage boy will tell you it's all about sex.
That's just for aerodynamic purposes. That's why bombs look like that.
I thought it was Big Boy or wasn't it Fat Boy? Was it Fat Boy or Big Boy?
One of them Robert California from The Office.
I think it was Fat Man and Little Boy.
Yeah, fat man and little boy. The point
Yeah,
I'm getting at is that they sound like penises.
You have to really read into that. I feel like you have to be looking for that to be. I certainly never got that.
I have to say that I think a good digression on the warnings of reading too much into things. We had a lot of literary theorists when I was in grad school and in undergrad. I did both undergrad and grad school at Berkeley, and we had some literary theorists that were very to certain ideas. This work means this and this thing, and they had theories about what was supposedly contained within certain literary works, and sometimes it felt like their theories were kind of far-fetched. So I think it's very important to say, okay, this might mean this, but are we sure that it means that? Or we have to guard against acquiring pet theories. That's
okay, this isn't a pet theory. It's the fact that men like their penises. Right, and they will make things.
Oh, it's nice to have a dick. Well, is that?
Yes,
is that the
and
song
they will
everyone's
make
playing?
things that are penis shaped without realizing that they're penis shaped. Like,
what
you
about
know,
aerodynamic?
It's also,
what about
it's also the
aerodynamic
case.
qualities? Like, don't those define what shape something is sometimes going to
the
be?
SpaceX
Amber.
rocket has a bigger front on it than it does the rest of the rocket. That's
Amber.
not aerodynamic.
Remember the
Yeah, it's
penis-
aerodynamic. They're
the-
white mushrooms and all these other things. They're like certain fish. They all grow to look like that shape.
Yeah,
What I'm
mushrooms
saying is
do.
the
We didn't
penis is a
design
very common
mushrooms.
shape. Like
Yeah.
the penis is a pretty common shape. It's not like
Yeah.
a five-pointed star or something. Like,
Although,
I
okay,
mean,
so Donna Barr's been going on lately. Cartoonist Donna Barr has been about how women's breasts are basically men bred women to be basically cows. I mean, but like the beginning of the Mad Max movie.
Oh,
You know,
boy.
that sounds a lot like Desmond Morris's book, The Naked Ape,
Amazing.
where he talks about in the sex chapter that things like lipstick
Right.
developed because women were trying to mimic their labia.
Yeah.
So that men would see the red and go, "Ooh, that's like a vagina. I could have sex with that."
Yeah,
Well,
I think,
I like Desmond Morris. He also wrote a book called the Naked Woman that goes into
Yeah.
that kind of stuff in more detail.
Yeah.
The
I'm
Naked
more
Woman.
of a fan of
That's
his
good.
book, Cat Watching. You know, I thought that was more.
Oh, yeah, Cat
more
Watching. Yeah, I
interesting
remember,
than
yeah.
The Naked Ape and the
Yeah, that's
Naked
good.
Woman.
Yeah.
I've read a lot of Desmond Morris, but he
I've
has
enjoyed
this filter that he looks through everything. Where I believe that Desmond Morris hates men and likes to kind of diminish them to and I mean, albeit the Naked Ape is trying to diminish man to an animal, right? But
Yeah.
it feels like he's more respectful to women in his writing than to men. He's like, men are defined by their hormones and their sex drive, and this is what drives them, right? But then he'll talk about women with a lot more subtlety.
The Naked Ape did a lot to popularize, evolution.
Yeah.
I mean, it was sort of out in the 70s. I mean, in the 70s, plenty of people clinging on to the idea that evolution wasn't real.
Yeah.
I don't know who. Maybe some
Oh,
people
he's-
were.
In
But
the
He's picking up a
70s,
book,
in the 70s, yes.
Timothy's grabbing a book. What book are you
Here's
grabbing?
Witzel's book, The Origins of the World's Mythologies. I just realized it was on my shelf above my computer.
Hey, Tim. Like, so, when I think about myths, I think about what purpose do they serve? Do they make a culture like a nation seem exceptional? Do they make it seem like morally superior? Do they justify certain actions? Like, what is the purpose
I don't have a
of the
doctorate.
myth?
I don't have a doctorate, but my idea of that is that people have always tried to explain things around them. And before they had an understanding of science and stuff, it was really easy to think that when you heard thunder, that the gods were angry. And
sure.
then a story
And
developed out of that.
as
So I
a
could be
sort
wrong.
of
What do you
creative
think?
person, it's almost like, it's a bit more than that. I mean, it's like you're sort of personifying these things. I mean, with the imagination. I mean, it's more, these days it's all a little sort of cheapened, but, there is this sort of connection. When you draw something, you sort of become it.
Well, there's also the idea that when religion started, right, when people were coming up with ideas to help explain the world around them, that they were hearing their own thoughts in their head for the first time and thought that gods were talking to them because they didn't recognize them as their own thoughts.
That's a
So
weird
like, so in that case, the myth is basically kind of calming you. You're anxious about not understanding the world around you. It's like a calming myth. But I mean, it's very interesting to me, like to see like contemporary myths and like how they function and why they function and why they're popular, like how they're used as tools.
What would you say as a contemporary myth?
Well, American exceptionalism, stuff like that. You know, the idea
Manifest
that
destiny.
Yeah. I mean, and a lot of empires, I'm sure, had exceptionalist myths around them saying, you know, we're never going to fall. We are better than these other societies. We're exceptional in this way and that way. And like, how does this, you know, to me, that's interesting.
I don't know.
So you're thinking about the so I guess the way that I would see this, the idea is what function does it serve is I think that's interesting and right. And I think that the question would be this: I'm sure that there's a variety of myths that start in a place in year one of a city or whatever, or year one of a nation, but then some of them will get sifted out in a semi-Darwinian process, and the ones that remain are the ones that remain over hundreds of years are the ones that served some sort of purpose for the people, that remained popular. And the way that folk tales, like Little Red Riding Hood type of folk tales, are explained is often also by a semi-Darwinian process. So those details that seemed somehow interesting are the ones that remain into folk tales, and folk tales are very close to myths, of course. So right, I think that's probably that's probably right. The things that seemed impressive somehow or served some sort of purpose are the ones that remain in the corpus of myth.
Tim, do you think Homer's The Odyssey is then a myth or a form of history?
Oh yeah, no. There's so many. Well, first of all, we can't answer it exactly. We don't have the evidence, but there are so many. There certainly were attacks on Troy. We know where Troy is. I've been there.
But like in the Odyssey, Poseidon like personally attacks Odysseus. So I would put it in the category of myth because
absolutely.
Active magic and cryptics and gods.
Right. Supernatural stuff is not something that we can believe. Things that
this goes back to what I'm saying. It's like, you know, as artists, and in some ways there's sort of no difference. It's like a sort of fiction is a reality. You're attacked by Poseidon. Yeah, you're like, the sea is at you. He's attacked you.
Yeah.
You know, I mean, if you've got any sort of poetic spirit, you know, there's no difference.
The reason why Poseidon attacks him, though, is because, you know, he's like, I'm amazing. I did all this by myself. Screw the gods. And Poseidon got mad that he didn't thank him for his success.
Yeah, well, Poseidon will do that, won't he?
I think the question is there a factual layer under the poems of Homer? And that we know that there are attacks on Troy. We have destruction levels at the site of Troy. We know that Troy existed, and we have Hittite chronicles saying that the Ahiyawa, which is certainly the Achaeans, the Greeks, were doing military expeditions in the western part of the Hittite Empire, which is where Troy is. Troy is referred to as Ilion or Ilios by the Greeks, and the Hittites refer to a city to the west called Wilusa. Wilusa is very close to Ilios. It's the way the Hittites would have written something like Ilios as Wilusa. So we have factual kernels that are there. We have Homer gives descriptions of bronze weapons. We have found archaeologically in the archaeological record things that match those. He describes a boar's tooth helmet of all things. That's not something that you're just going to come up with, and we actually have a boar's tooth helmet that has survived from the period. It's in. Oh yeah.
What?
Oh god, yeah.
Wow.
Look up boar's tooth helmet, and you'll see it online.
Oh, I'm looking it up right now.
There are tons of things. There are tons of details that point to the sort of technology that was present, the tool use, the material culture, and then he gives a lot of details about the way marriages are conducted that are probably very real for the period after the Bronze Age collapse.
That's so cool! I'm looking at the helmet right now, and then they also have statues of people wearing the helmet from the same period.
Yeah, so you do have a lot of details that he gives that are real, but where the stories about magic and that sort of things, those are clearly at best metaphors.
There's actually a few different examples of the boar's tooth helmet. There's at least 3 different ones, it looks like, according to Google.
When you say boar's tooth, does that mean the tusks?
Yeah.
Tusks?
Let me share my screen, and then.
So there's no way it was aliens. All the magical stuff. It wasn't aliens then.
Because that actually sounds pretty cool. That sounds like something I would wear.
This is the helmet.
Yeah. When it comes to sort of, I can give you my brief. I can give you my brief thing about alien stuff if you guys want to hear it.
Oh yes. Oh, I forgot. Also, yes, you're a bit of an alien expert. You've been invited to be an alien expert.
You're not an ancient aliens guy, are you?
Huh?
You're not an ancient aliens guy, are you?
No, I'm not. But I'm about to appear on the show as the straight man, and afterwards they're gonna have an expert. So I'm the one giving the straight archaeological stuff.
Thank you.
Yes, the history lesson, but they'll edit you to make you sound like a total crank.
Cut that with their so-called alien expert. So basically, a lot of people, especially plumbers, for some reason, will ask me, "What's your theory about ancient civilizations?" And clearly, they've been watching those kinds of alien shows. And so, the thing to explain is the Drake equation and the Fermi paradox. Those are essential to understanding all of this. Basically, the way I see it, the universe, as we know, has existed for 13.8 billion years. This is very, very well accepted. The chances that there would be a starfaring race that would coincide with the last few thousand years close enough to us is
the chances of anything coming from Mars are a million to one, they said. Yet still they come.
Yeah, it's a ridiculously small chance in terms of the size of if we just talked about our galaxy, the size of our galaxy and the size of 13.8 billion years. So the chance that there would be a starfaring race close enough to us just in the last 5,000 years is vanishingly small. There may have been one that was in our neighborhood 50,000 years ago, or 500,000 years ago, 5 million years ago, 50 million years ago, 500 million years ago, 5 billion years ago.
But there's been some changes in the numbers in that equation.
Right.
One we've discovered that we've now discovered that there are planets around every single star, just like ours. So that number went way up. Absolutely. But then we discovered that actually life starting in that random soup is way more unlikely than we thought. So it went right back down again.
Right. So now keep in mind the Drake equation always predicted that there would be planets around stars long before we started to discover them. I think there's about 5,000 exoplanets that have been unambiguously discovered. Probably a quarter of those are in Goldilocks zones around their respective star where there's liquid water. Liquid water is probably a place where you would see life.
I just feel like
one of them said we would find life within 10 years.
Well, the next thing to think about is the panspermia theory. Are you all familiar with that?
I'm not. I don't think.
The panspermia would be the idea that life didn't necessarily originate on this planet, but that it actually can inadvertently travel through very, very long distances.
I thought that's been proven with the water bear. Because they determined that the water bear doesn't have any DNA that's shared with any other creature on Earth.
The tardigrade shares DNA with us. All living things. Yeah, tardigrades. The thing about tardigrades is that they can survive in extreme environments. So that's what would probably something like that would be the kind of thing that could. So here's the basic idea. If you have something like an asteroid impact on a planet, there is crust out of the atmosphere and escapes the orbit of the planet. This is absolutely proven. We have Mars stuff on Earth that came from Mars in a situation of an asteroid impact on Mars. It flew up and then it ended up getting in our orbit and then landed on our planet. This is proven beyond a shadow of a doubt. The next question would be, could such rocky crop actually shield life cells living through the coldness of space and then through the heat of re-entry into the atmosphere of a planet? Probably it could if it was big enough. And if you took a chunk of wet soil from our Earth, it's of course teeming with microbes. What this would mean is that if you had an asteroid impact on the Earth, there is a very good chance that stuff with cells on it would fly up. Some of it is going to fly beyond the atmosphere. that means that there's a tiny chance that it could actually end somewhere else. And if that place had liquid water, i.e. warm but not too hot temperatures, those cells are primitive enough to where they might actually start reproducing well. So this is the panspermia theory. It sounds extremely, in terms of the number of times that this could happen and go from star system to star system, it sounds extremely unlikely. But if you think about 13.8 billion years of time, even an extremely unlikely incident could result in cells traveling even from star system to star system, I guess.
I just always feel like the ancient
Tim,
aliens
can I
theory
provide a
diminishes
counter-argument
the.
for you?
I'm sorry, what?
Can I provide a counter argument that you may want to consider?
Please, I love it.
Okay. Have you heard of the simulation hypothesis?
Yeah.
Okay.
I never thought that it was very likely that we were living in a simulation.
Okay.
I like how it just stops
When
it.
you
Okay.
look at the myths
Mm-hmm.
and the religions
Mm-hmm.
of humanity,
Yeah.
are a majority of them described as higher beings creating our world and our reality?
They don't talk about the reality. They talk about natural things. Nobody ever says our reality. They would say they've created the mountains, they've created rain, etc.
Out of what?
Sometimes it's specified. Sometimes it's clay.
Okay.
That's a good one.
Clay is
So,
frequently
what
found in Maya and in Hebrew, obviously, and in Egyptian myth.
I just wanted to point out, if we are in a simulation, something that has been created by things above us, that means not only are all the rules, those are all gone, because they can put forward things that they have created. They can also put forward things that are not necessarily true. So when people look at history and they look at myths, we're looking at things that have been passed down in various ways, and we accept them to be true. We accept them not necessarily to be intentionally a lie. But Charles Fort, the father of Forteanism, he proposed that many of these things that we encounter, like UFOs, Bigfoots, fairies, etc., were being done by a cosmic joker, because we have eyewitness accounts of all of these things, everything from UFOs to people swearing that they have seen Santa Claus. And the question is, do you believe these people? Do you believe Betty and Barney Hill? Do you believe these other UFO sightings?
I feel like Ancient Aliens diminishes the cleverness of ancient man. Because
but you see, we don't have a window to what's real in the past or not. We're making assumptions.
Yes, we do. We have the archaeological
record.
record. That is our window. We have myths
it's
and
our
legends and stories
interpretation of what we find. That's not a direct window.
If you want, what I can give you is the standard answer to that from people in my discipline who have been studying this kind of thing their entire lives and who have been trained extremely rigorously by people who have studied these things for their entire lives.
Okay.
So we have to go with it's a very basic principle in science and history. We go with the explanation that is least complex. We go with the Occam's razor type of explanation.
razor, yeah.
So if the choice is between a slow diffusion of myths about powerful things that created the sky, something like what a child would come up with, versus an extremely complex belief in some sort of Prometheus type of story, Prometheus the movie, not the Greek myth, then I would say that generally speaking, we would go with the principle of Occam's razor. We would say, which of these requires more steps? The idea of us living in a grandfather simulation or whatever it is requires very, very, very many steps. I would be very hesitant to accept an idea like that unless a lot more evidence occur. Second point, in regard to people who swear that they've seen Santa Claus or Artemis or Athena or the Virgin Mary talking to them, which thing is more probable right now with the evidence that we have, occasional brain farts that people have, if you'll excuse my language, or the existence of a class of supernatural super beings that surrounds us that's constantly hiding from us? I think that probably the existence of occasional brain spasms is much more likely and is actually proven to be real. Brain spasms are real. People will see things that are not there, that other people are.
Dale's friends with the machine elves that you see when you're on DMT.
I don't do DMT. I've done a lot of LSD, but that was when that was in the late 1980s, and I enjoyed that. And then I stopped one day because I said to myself, okay, that was fun, and I'm kind of done now. But so going to the hypothesis with the fewer steps, the more complex the hypothesis is, the more links in a chain there are, the more a faulty link can ruin the entire hypothesis. You want to go with a hypothesis that has the fewest links in it. So I would say that a notion of very, very old myths is probably that are imaginative myths, people trying as hard as they could to explain the world around them because their children were asking them, why is the sky like that? Why are things heavy? But why? Coming up with some sort of story to satisfy the children, to make them stop bothering them. I would say that that's more likely than a kind of chariots of the gods kind of scenario.
Ancient man was very, very clever. You know, the Romans, going back to the Romans, you know, they'd have a city. How do I get water to my city? They'd have a meeting, they figure it out, they build an aqueduct, and it'd carry water, you know, several miles to the city. In some cities, they even had fountains going up because they had like a lake up here, and the pressure from the water coming down the lead pipe to it actually had this fountain that you know, expanded and stuff like that. You know, ancient man was very clever.
Yeah, these are smart engineers. Yeah.
Well, I feel like modern man, you know, we don't have to carry water hundreds of miles to our city state anymore. We just turn on the faucet and there it is.
And most of us don't know how a TV works either.
Exactly. So man doesn't think about how the water gets there. And so modern man like looks at the ancient world and they're like, wow, this is so tightly put together, and they had irrigation and all this. It must have been aliens because I can't figure it out.
Right.
It's stupid.
That equation that you were talking about,
the Drake equation.
Yeah, the Drake equation. The one thing that, and maybe it does account for this, it seems to be saying that the chances of two civilizations overlapping over 13 billion years.
That's more like the Fermi paradox. Yeah.
Okay.
Right. Go ahead.
So the chances of these two advanced civilizations overlapping in this time and space. In this 13 billion year period of since the universe began, if I got that number right. But doesn't it make the assumption that those civilizations basically rise up and die out, and they don't stay around for billions of years?
It does, and they would need to stay around for literally billions and billions and billions of years, and I guess that's possible, and I guess that assumption is not strictly warranted because perhaps we're thinking too much in terms of the fossil record of life on this planet, and we are seeing species last for 200,000 years and then bloop and come up and then bloop, and even the long-lasting ones like trilobites and stuff, those come up and then die. So maybe it is assuming too much of a sort of end date of life forms. Maybe
if you got out of the environment, like if you got off this planet, if you did get outside your solar system,
if only we could dream,
then maybe, well, if somebody did in the 13 billion years, if somebody got off of their solar system and started going all over the place, maybe that would increase the likelihood of it. I don't know.
That could, but the other question is, there's a book called Rare Earth, which I highly recommend, and the basically, and this is actually pretty interesting. So this explains the Fermi paradox pretty well. Also, the Fermi paradox is just, why have we not been contacted yet? According to the authors of Rare Earth, life probably is pretty prevalent because it's just an extension of chemical matter. Cells will tend to form in places that have liquid water or something like that. But we haven't heard from civilizations because basically in most places, whatever life will rise up on a planet will tend to get destroyed back to extinction quickly. And you look at the big extinction events like the Permian Triassic event, those kinds of events, the thing that killed off the dinosaurs 65 million years ago, which was an asteroid hitting the Yucatan Peninsula. Those are probably quite frequent. And the fact that life has somehow managed to attain intelligence on this particular planet might be pretty unusual. Maybe single-celled organisms are in most places in our galaxy and by extension the universe, but it doesn't tend to rise up much beyond that. It doesn't tend to rise into multicellular organisms because there are so frequently solar flares, nearby supernovae, asteroids hitting a planet that things just sort of fall back. Look at the percentage of life forms that died in the last few massive extinctions. So we're talking about life being blasted back, the equivalent of 750, million years. Simpler forms are the ones that would survive something like that.
I know, we're so amazing. I mean, it's amazing how amazing we are, and here we are doing all these stupid things that we do, and
we happen to be in a statistically favored place in this galaxy. I would say that otherwise we wouldn't be here to talk about it if this hadn't been lucky. And sometimes people will say, "Well, doesn't that mean something that we're so lucky?" And I would say, if you have 500,000 lottery tickets and there's one winner, that guy is not particularly special. He just happened to get the lottery ticket. So on this particular star, on this particular planet in the Goldilocks zone of the star, it happened to get a lottery ticket of a relatively lower amount of solar flares nearby supernovae and asteroids crashing into it. And in the interstices between these terrible events, life happened to have attained multicellularity, and then for a brief flash,
you had intelligent, like life and civilization. Nothing.
There's been a recent photo by the new Russell telescope, or Russell, the new telescope. I'm trying to think of the name, where you can see an atmosphere around Titan.
Right.
And it's amazing. I mean, that's in our solar system. So we don't even know if there's life on Titan yet, but there's an atmosphere. There's liquid water.
Yeah, that will be interesting to see. That would be one of the first places to look. Yes, a fantastic illustration. Wow, you really are a good artist.
Oh, wait.
The cheek is really excellent.
You inspired me, Chuck. So
I know where you stole that design for the tripod.
Pretty similar.
Yeah, I got it. Yeah, it's Jeff Wayne's musical version of War of the Worlds.
Yeah.
The chances of anything coming from Mars are 1,000,000 to 1, he said. Yet still they come. Da-da-da, da-da-da, ba-ba-ba, da-da-da, da-da-da, ba-ba-ba.
I feel like you emphasized his mouth a lot there.
Well, you were talking about how horrible the Spartans were, really, or they weren't that horrible. I guess they did go to battle. So, but yeah, they had their little elite.
They weren't
system.
Horrible. They were just different, and they were
just
highly
different.
Yeah,
they seemed pretty horrible.
Militaristic, and
I made him look a bit horrible. Yeah. But don't worry, Dale. Yeah, don't worry what Dr. Tim says.
Well,
their chances may be 1,000,000 to 1 that we're all
disagree.
dreamed
I
up
know
by
that I'm right in this.
Tim, can I get in one more kind of serious question?
Oh yeah,
because I think we're going to run out of time here. But so has anybody tried to map these periods of drought and immigration to like natural cycles, like solar minimums or anything like that?
So the first thing I'd bring up is what's called Milankovitch cycles, which are irregularities in the orbit and the trajectory of the Earth. So it's absolutely the case that these follow on Milankovitch cycles. So
that's why the North Star wobbles, right?
I'm not sure about that one, but this is why we have constant shifts in warmth, in global level warmth, that sort of thing. So that's the first thing. The second thing is interesting work has been done by Joe Manning. He was a professor of ancient history at Stanford. Now he's at Yale. What he's done is quite interesting. He's used ice cores in various places in Europe and elsewhere in the world and dendrochronology, and so things like tree core samples to track climate variations of the past, let's just say 5,000 years. And then he's actually tried to argue, and he did a great talk at USC about 5 years ago that I was present at. He tried to argue that some of a great number of the big revolts that took down different dynasties in Egyptian history actually closely tracked those periods of droughts, which would mean that since a pharaoh is expected to be the intercessor between the gods and the people would tend to blame a particular dynasty if there were droughts. And then you get a different dynasty going into power in that kind of situation. So he was able to track it. I don't remember the name of the actual book, but the guy's name is Joe Manning, Manning. Very respected amongst Egyptologists and Greco-Romanists.
Okay, now I want to change track a little bit. Well, not too much. Go back a little bit to what Dale was saying. What about Niels Bohr? Like, he was saying, like, towards the end of his life, that, you know, he thought things like quantum physics only happen because the physicists all believe it happens. You know, in that reality, you know, we sort of observe things, and then that reality sort of gets set. But really, things are a lot more stranger. And
It's funny you should say that, because quantum physics, you know, the act of observing something changes it.
Yes. Well, you know, you get into all these sort of Schrodinger's cat conversations. But I think the point is that maybe, you know, we create our own reality. If you start believing in aliens, you know, you might start seeing aliens pretty soon. Or you start believing in ghosts. I mean, I know people who see ghosts, like ghost hunters and stuff. And they're more, you know, so are we generating our reality around us in a very real sense, in a lot more powerful way than any of us actually believe that we are?
Can I just say something about music that relates to what you're talking about? When you hear music, there's too much information to process, and you have to process it in real time. You can't look at it like a picture for 4 hours. It passes, your ears hear it, your brain processes it. It has to happen fairly quickly. And most musical information, people do not absorb. They absorb key points. But if you train your brain to look for something in music and you look for it really hard, you'll start finding it.
Yeah, listening for the bass beat or the drums or something.
Yeah,
like
listening
that.
for a certain frequency or noise, or there's a lot of things. And a lot of, like, sometimes pros go through this ear training stuff, and I did. But I guess what I'm saying is most information as a human being, you're missing. And if you start looking for something really hard in this sea of information, you can start supporting it. But it doesn't mean it's necessarily there. It's a sea of information. And
well, there's nothing there. That's the problem. When you look inside everything, we realize there is nothing there except a fuzzy blur of probability.
Well, I'm saying there's too much there.
No, but there's literally nothing there except for, like, the observer who observes it, and then it becomes real.
Can I ask a question to Tim?
Yep.
Tim, we should have been talking about Homer and the Odyssey.
That's all right. Far-ranging.
Well, actually, Tim said he wouldn't discuss the Odyssey. He said, I'll come and talk about Homer. I'm talking about Homer. I said, oh, good, I've read the Odyssey. That's like one of the few classics I've read. He goes, oh, no, I'm not talking about that.
We're talking about Homer.
Tim's students are going to have nothing to watch.
We're talking about these stories that have traveled through history, and they have been thought to be significant enough that history respects them, and the stories continue to go forward. In fact, they inspire movies and television.
Yep.
Now, the people who heard these stories at the start, and then as generations go by and hear them reinterpreted or read them in books.
Wait, so what's the question?
As time changes, are we actually still reading the same story? Do the people who heard it at the beginning, who actually believed in this supernatural, do they get a different story than we would get now reading it in a book? Does Homer need to be listened to in the meter, and do you need to believe in those things to actually understand Homer?
Oh, that's a beautiful question, and it kind of reminds me of, I remember, what was it? I think it was Cabaret, and someone argued once. It wasn't Cabaret, it was something else. Some movie like that, and someone said, you have to No, it wasn't. It was the Divine Comedy by Dante. Someone was saying in the book, The Secret History by Donna Tartt, Julian, the teacher, says to really get the Divine Comedy, you have to be Catholic for at least an hour of your life. You have to be Catholic for a few hours to really, really get it. And I thought there was something great about that, something brilliant and beautiful about that. Because if you close off your heart,
fan fiction for Catholicism.
Well, if you close off your heart, you're to allowing yourself to feel as Catholic as you can, then you're missing so much in Dante. You know, that's what the argument would be. You have to go in with an open heart. As far as the meter goes, that's a fantastic and also really profoundly beautiful question, because when you're actually reading Homer in the Greek, do I have it here? I don't know where it is. It is done in a meter. So, here we go. It is done. I'll read you a little bit of Odyssey in the meter. Hos homen entha kathoidoi polutlas dios Odysseus hupno kamato harmenos autaratene be cresfa icon andron de monte polinte hoi primen pod enaionin Eurochoroi hypereye. So obviously you're going to be hearing it, experiencing it differently. The ideal picture would be you're in front of a campfire in a beautiful aristocratic hall, in front of an aristocratic hall of some sort of Greek grand family. The year is 700 BC. There's a guy in front of the fire. It's at night. He's reciting it from memory. He's kind of acting out the parts. There's someone else playing the lyre, some sort of simple harp type of thing. You've all had wine and you're kind of sitting cross-legged, or maybe there's some nice chairs. These are being done for aristocratic audiences. And the guy is acting out these characters and there's firelight everywhere. I had the privilege of seeing a one-man...
You know that scene in Return of the Jedi where C-3PO is telling the story of Star Wars to the Ewoks? That's the picture in my mind.
And then there's a scene, that's a perfect example. There's a scene in Gene Wolfe's book, The Earth of the New Sun, the 5th book of the Severian stories, where Severian has come back to the dawn of civilization, and he's doing a scene like that with the firelight. So the C-3PO thing is absolutely ideal, and since of course C-3PO knows the language, he can translate it. I saw a one-man version of the Iliad. Sounds impossible, but it was a very selective version at the Pasadena Playhouse. He had a harpist with him, and he was just sort of acting out scenes from it, and that was as close as I've ever gotten, I think. But no, I think you're absolutely right. If you don't, I guess that's why we want to immerse ourselves in the religion of the Greeks, so that when we're reading Homer, we can kind of see in our mind's eye as closely as possible the experience of the original audiences. I think it's a beautiful thing to try to do. And that's
what about the stories of like Oedipus and Antigone? You know, like those are those considered myths or just like folk?
Those are considered myths. So keep in mind, the first Greek historian that we actually have stuff from is Herodotus. Okay, and one of the things that he was doing as one of his projects, as you might guess, was trying to distinguish between history and myths. This is what Herodotus wanted to do, among other things. So he wanted to say, well, there's this story about the abduction of Helen. There's this story about this, blah, 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 blah. So the Greeks were interested in trying to make that distinction fairly early on.
All right. Well, I think we have to wrap it up a bit there. It was interesting what you were just saying there, Amber, about C-3PO. I'm just going to quickly relate it to we had a guest dungeon master this weekend in our D&D game, and he sort of plays with sort of bigger corporate groups and things, and he had he used the projector and he had all sounds and things, that was a very handy skill to be able to just sort of come up with that stuff on demand. But you don't need it. You can tell a story, and set that atmosphere. Tim, you did a fantastic job there of taking us back to Homer's hearth, and we learned a lot. I love having a guest on who actually knows what they're talking about. All our guests know more than I do about everything. But I like to think I know a few things, but then I talk to someone like you and I realise I don't know anything. So that's great.
I doubt that.
Anyway, I hope you'll come back again. We love having you. That was a very interesting discussion as always.
Yeah.
We covered all. Oh, yes. So is there anything anybody should be looking out for? Do you have any books or lectures or anything coming up that people could see you at?
Not right now, but if anyone wants to get the handle on the Spartan population crisis, this is my book it's very short. It's with the tripping on the tongue name of Spartan Oliganthropia. It's by Brill. And if it's about $80 on Amazon, it's quite expensive. So if someone really wants, I can send them the PDF. I think I'm allowed to do that. So there. It's somewhat technical, but it's about the Spartan population crisis. And my next work is about essentially eugenics in Sparta. And then after that, my next thing is going to be After that, my next thing is about what's the biological idea of paternity confidence, which we find amongst mammals and birds, and how it plays out in Homer's Iliad and Odyssey. So it's going to be a very biologically oriented look at the Iliad.
Yeah, light subjects, something you'll finish in an afternoon, definitely.
Yes, and that's nice. So yes, folks, if you want a PDF, use coupon code Zardoz Conjunction, and send us a note, and we'll get that to you.
Yes, very well.
All right, okay, thanks everybody. I'm Chuck Whelan. I was here today with co-host Chris Porro, Amber Greenlee, Dale Sipperley, and our special guest, Dr. Timothy Doran. And that's it, folks. Here's the theme tune.
Don't eat people, kids.
Here's a theme song for Chuck Whelan Showy. He asked me to write one, but I stole from David Bowie. Here's a theme song. Chuck Whelan is the best. We have lots of hosts, but we're running out of gas. Will you be our guest on? Will you be our guest on? Be on the Chuck Whelan Show. Whoa, 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 whoa.
If you're gonna have a show, you